So when William Jennings Bryan lost the presidential election of 1896, remember William McKinley won. One of the things I mentioned it in the last lecture, one of the things I want you to remember is that uh, William Jennings Bryan gave the Cross of Gold speech. He's famous for the Cross of Gold speech. So check that out on the internet or uh, in your textbook. I think that's going to be a question in a test. I'm going to give you a few more lectures, maybe just a couple. See how long it takes, and then that will be the last lectures before your first big test. So you'll probably have 3 big tests, mainly multiple choice, but then also I'm going to give you some take-home essays. So probably, for each test, there'll also be like a take-home essay that I'll give you actually a couple of weeks, several weeks to do. So I know, we're kind of going, week by week, so I don't have the whole semester necessarily planned exactly right because I change it up quite a bit. One of the things I want you to remember is that depending on how you look at it, with the election of 1896 and Bryan's loss, he ran for president several times, that the populist movement declined. Now, it depends, again, how you look at it, because right after the populist movement kind of goes down, what we see is the progressive movement moving up. So you had the populist, and then you had the progressives. So you could say in the 1870s, all right, you see kind of the height of the populists, and then by the 1890s, they're kind of down. But then you see the progressives. Now, what was the difference between the populists and the progressives? Well, there wasn't a big difference in ideology, and that's why you can say that there wasn't really a decline in the populist movement. They were, just it was a different group of people that sort of took those ideas and then put them into practice. So the progressives, when we talk about the progressives and we talk about the progressive movement, we're talking about the 1890s all the way until about World War I, really. When was World War I? Well, 1914 to 1918, the United States entered the war in 1917. Excuse me. These are some dates. This is not so important right here. And like I said, I don't ask a lot of dates, but this is definitely some dates that you need to know. So you shouldn't leave this class without knowing when World War I occurred. So it started in 1914, ended in 1918 with an armistice. In 1919 was the Treaty of Versailles. And we'll spend a whole lot of time on that. So sometimes you'll see people talk about, well, they'll put the end of World War I in 1919 because that was, the real, that was the treaty that ended it. In 1918, it was just an armistice, so it was basically a ceasefire. All right, so what was the progressive movement? How is it different than the populist? Well, like I said, there was no real difference in their ideology. They wanted many of the same things, but they were more urban, meaning that many of them were from the cities, and they were, and I know you know that. I'm not, hope I don't insult your intelligence sometimes when I say things like that. Okay, I just want to be clear. And so also they were middle class, upper middle class, and some rich, actually. Okay, for example, Theodore Roosevelt was not poor, and he was a progressive. All right, you saw progressives on local levels, all right, local government. In Louisiana, it would be the mayor, for example, or the police jury. You saw it on the state level, and then you saw it also on the federal level. So both economically and politically, you see progressives on all levels, and even you had Democrats who were progressives, and you had Republicans. So it was something that crossed party lines. I mean, I think a lot of the debates today and the people that are politically active, let's say, for example, the Tea Party people and the Occupy people, actually, if they found, and they do, even though they talk about each other, if they found common ground, and like I said, I think that it would actually be easier than they realize. They could probably get a whole lot more done. But people tend to be very divided. And I'm drinking my coffee here. Hope you don't mind. So, um, what did the um, progressives really want? Okay. Um, well, again, many progressives um, wanted the same thing as the populists. Okay. And you can say to expand economic opportunity, and to expand political um, influence, or you could say to give more people a voice. Now, of course, one of the things that the progressives were able to do eventually was give women the right to vote. One of the things that they were not able to do was to uh, get rid of, to eliminate all of the barriers for African Americans. This is a good example, okay, of how sometimes we can move forward and at the same time, in other ways, step back. So let's say, for example, in the early or the late 1870s, African Americans could vote, okay, because of the 15th Amendment. But in the 15th Amendment, it did not include women. But then, because of all of the loopholes that we've talked about, in disenfranchising African Americans, all right, by the 1920s, African Americans couldn't vote, but yet women could. Okay, so this is, it's actually redundant when you look at the wording, all right, of in the Constitution, all right, when you say a more perfect union. Okay, you can't have something that's more perfect. All right, so some people say, well, that's kind of redundant, or maybe not redundant, but that doesn't make sense. It's not good grammar. It's not good word usage. Blah blah blah. Some of these people need to go out and just chill out. Okay, English is very important. Okay, don't go tell the English teachers. I said that English is very very important, and being able to speak properly and that. All right, but people that look at the Constitution and they say that they're just like, okay, they need to chill out. All right, well, really, what that means though is that there is, when you study American history, sometimes you see that we have not always lived up to the values that our country was founded on. We still don't, to a large extent, one can argue. Okay, and you see it on both sides of the political spectrum. And the way I've always interpreted this is that it gives you that sense of moving toward toward perfection. Perfection is really probably, it's impossible. Okay, but you can move, always constantly move toward it. Now, I'm going to talk some more, maybe more specifically about these things in a little bit, but we're going to kind of go back and talk about particular groups that were in the progressive movement. And of course, one group that we talked about a little bit before were African Americans. And I told you I was going to talk a little bit about W.E.B. Du Bois. And he was an African American activist in the early 1900s, the first quarter of the 1900s. And Du Bois once said defiantly that he was born with a flood of Negro blood, a strain of French blood, a bit of Dutch, but thank God no Anglo-Saxon. Okay, so that's just a quote from W.E.B. Du Bois. And Du Bois was a graduate. In fact, I think he may have been the first African American graduate of Harvard. All right, he received his PhD there. Harvard, they wanted me to, when I was, they wanted me to go over there, but I went to UL instead. All right, okay, I'm just joking about that. But anyway, Du Bois was always very well dressed. All right, he sported a goatee. He always wore gloves. He walked around with a cane. And he attacked Booker T. Washington's policy as one of capitulation. So we see this sometimes. And we talked about Booker T. Washington. Du Bois asked how any race could enjoy economic progress without civil and political rights. Now, this is very important, okay? And this has, meaning today. So you're looking at economic rights. And then you have political rights. Now, what are the difference? So, basically, Booker T. Washington focused on these, focused on economics. Okay, you get training, work on, get a job, work hard, maybe get your own business, that type of thing. And then these things would come. Du Bois was the opposite. Du Bois said, listen, you have to get, you can't have one without the other. Okay, for example, let's say somebody's, would you have political rights if someone said that you couldn't work? Okay, that's part of your political rights. Okay, well, can you ever have true economic rights, all right, and move up economically if you don't have political rights, if you can't vote? I mean, it's very, very difficult. Du Bois declared that African Americans could progress only, quote, by voting where we may vote, by persistent, unceasing agitation, by hammering at the truth, by sacrifice and work. And he concluded, we refuse to surrender the leadership of the race to cowards and trucklers. Now, of course, as I said, Du Bois's more confrontational approach had to do with, he was in Massachusetts. And it was easier to talk that way in Massachusetts than in the South. His more formal education background also had much to do with his preference for higher education. All right, he believed that why should African Americans just become vocational workers and get vocational training? I mean, those things are very important, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But Du Bois said, I mean, it would be something wrong if people said, well, that's all you can do, okay? And that higher education, getting a bachelor's degree, getting a master's degree or PhD was very important, and that everybody should be afforded the right to do that if that's what they wanted to do. Now, W.E.B. Du Bois helped organize what was known as the Niagara Movement for civil rights. All right, I'm actually a better writer than this, but I have this little, no, computer. I'm doing it on a computer, so it's not so easy. Anyway, this led to the NAACP. All right, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, and this was founded in 1909. A very important organization, especially when we get to the civil rights movement. Now, what about women? And the progressive movement. Well, there were female unions. For example, one was called the International Ladies Garment Workers Union. And they struggled for better pay and better working conditions. Women were also involved in social reform movements. Young middle class women like Jane Addams operated settlement houses, such as the Hull houses in Chicago. These were sort of like community houses that provided the poor with food, education, health care, child care. Oftentimes they were immigrant groups. They also helped the poor acquire financial and job skills and spoke out for public playgrounds, juvenile courts, workmen's compensation, and the abolition of child labor. Adams received the Nobel Peace Prize. Um, I think it was 1931. Okay, that she received the Nobel Peace Prize. So you can also check that out to make sure that I'm accurate. Catholic Church, Jewish agencies also became involved in similar work that Adams was doing, but she was definitely kind of the at the forefront of all that. Now, there was also a fight, also a part of the prohibition movement. I'm sorry, of the progressive movement called prohibition. And when I talk about that, I'm talking about the prohibition of alcohol. One was the Women's Christian Temperance Union. Women's Christian Temperance Union. Now, a lot of times when you look at temperance, it was not so much the complete abolition of alcohol, but it definitely, at first was a little bit, this organization, I guess, was a little bit. There were some members that were more moderate in terms of like, well, we just don't, we want to temper the use of alcohol and the drinking and sell and the manufacture of alcohol. Others, were more extreme and wanted to get rid of it completely. But they led the fight for the prohibition of the sale of alcohol. Eventually, they were the organization that led that fight. And it was a complete, total disaster in South Louisiana. Okay, and there are a lot of people in South Louisiana that are professional drinkers. Now, one of the big movements by women, of course, was the movement, all right, for what we call suffrage. Now, suffrage doesn't mean that you want to suffer, of course. It means the right to vote. I remember one time on Jay Leno or one of those shows, they went around and asked, what do you think about women's suffrage? And, people were like, well, we need to get rid of it completely, And basically, there was a joke because they were saying that, well, women should, need to get rid of their right to vote. And one of the associations that started this was the Women's Suffrage Association. And in 1920, they finally secured the passage of and you have to know this, 19th Amendment. Okay. Which guaranteed all women of the right age the right to vote. The age, of course, then was 21. It would become 18 later on, and rightfully so, because obviously if you can fight in a war at 18, even 17, then you should be able to vote. All right, so we'll end there, and I think I have probably one, maybe two more lectures before we discuss your test.